من النهار اليوم قراءة بآفاق المرحلة بظل السباق بين المدان ودخول دونالد ترامب البيت الأبيض. القراءة مع مساعد وزير الخارجية السابق لشؤون الشرق الأدنى ديفيد شينكر اللي اختبر العمل في إدارة ترامب الأولى وهو اليوم بمعهد واشنطن Institute. David Schenker, welcome to النهار.
To be with you.
At this critical time for the region, as Israel escalates its attack on Lebanon before President Trump's return to office, the chances of reaching a ceasefire agreement seem to be dwindling. In this interview, we would like to hear your insights on the pressing issue and the regional dynamics shaping the prospect for peace. Let's start with the latest development in Lebanon and the talks on a ceasefire agreement very soon. As Axios reported now from US officials, the ball is in the court of the Lebanese side, and we want answers from Lebanon before Hokstein leaves for Beirut. What can you tell us about this whole issue?
Well, listen, essentially, Hokstein has come up with some sort of proposal to finally try and implement 1701. As we know, from 2006 onward, it had never been implemented. There was a commitment by the Israelis, by the government of Lebanon. Never happened in Lebanon, certainly. UNIFIL was unable to go to different parts of South Lebanon. The Lebanese armed forces at times deconflicted, collaborated, and cooperated with Hezbollah. And the Israelis, of course, felt compelled to do overflights to monitor where Hezbollah was taking up its positions in the south. So 1701 didn't work. Hokstein has come up with a proposal that is based on 1701, but includes a new mechanism for monitoring the monitors to somehow ensure that it's actually implemented this time, as well as some provisions for Lebanon to actually secure its borders, prevent the rearmament of Hezbollah. So right now, I think Hokstein is waiting for a positive response from Nabi Berri, but this is very difficult. I think, I read Al-Akhbar today, and I think according to Ibrahim Al-Amin, Hezbollah is busy achieving a second divine victory. They're winning the war, and so why would they agree to any type of concession? And so we're stuck with Berri being the representative of Hezbollah here.
In a previous discussion, you separated between Gaza and Lebanon, as well as the proposed solution for both. Do you think a solution in Lebanon has become possible before a solution in Gaza? Are you optimistic about the proposal of for a ceasefire and the potential visit of Ámos to the region anytime soon? We don't know yet when it's going to be, but are you optimistic about it?
Well, I think there's a lot more people in Lebanon advocating for Lebanon supporting Lebanon as opposed to, having its country being $8.5 billion worth of damage to Lebanon because of Hezbollah's unilateral decision to support Hamas. And so I don't know if Hezbollah has moved off the position that they won't do or any type of ceasefire until the war is over in Gaza. But there's an opportunity here. I think there's pressure on Israel from the Trump administration to wrap up the wars. I think it's, in a way, more difficult to do so in Gaza because Hamas still holds some 100 hostages, including a dozen or half a dozen Americans. And so it's very difficult to wind down that war. In Lebanon, there's, a set of principles I think that can be applied. I wouldn't say I'm optimistic. I think that if you're looking at the type of operations that Israel is doing now in Lebanon, it suggests to me they have basically taken care of the type of targets they need to within Hezbollah, a lot of the strategic weapons, and the ground maneuver in the south, the so-called raids, have basically implemented 1701, did the work that UNIFIL and the Lebanese armed forces didn't do since 2006. So I think they're ready to wind down there. As Hawkstein has said, the ball is in Hezbollah's court.
When we talk about a ceasefire agreement, we talk always about the implementation of the 1701. Some argue that Resolution 1701 is no longer viable, and you share this view. Do you believe there is a need for a revised version of the resolution? Some aspects of such a proposal seem to appear in the new suggestion presented by the U.S. ambassador in Lebanon, Lisa Johnson, to Mr. Nabih Berri. So do you think this proposal could lead to a ceasefire? Will Israel accept it? What about the U.S. conditions for supporting and funding the Lebanese army or leading a supervisory and monitoring committee for implementation? And we know the role of the army is very critical in this situation.
Yeah, well, you've asked me 5 questions there. Let me do the first part.
Yep.
There are ways to get to an end of this war or to come to some sort of ceasefire. One is through 1701. This is a relatively modest solution that just concerns most of the south of Lebanon. And also, of course, Lebanon securing its borders to prevent the total rearmament of Hezbollah, including into the south. But I think, the degradation of Hezbollah militarily provides an opportunity. And there are some who are saying, well, now is really the time to pursue 1559, which is the disarmament of militia in Lebanon. Of course, all militias except for Hezbollah were disarmed. And because of that, Lebanon has no sovereignty. It has an Iranian-backed militia that has dominated the country for several decades. And so I think the Israelis are more limited in their purview about what they would want or what they would need. But there are others, including among the Lebanese, who say that this is an opportunity to right-size Hezbollah's presence, that there no longer is a need for Shab al-Jaish wal-Muqawama, the tripartite alliance, in which Hezbollah is the dominant factor and the decider of issues of war and peace over your country, and also a group that intimidates or kills all its political opponents in the country. I think a lot of people are sick of it, and all of the destruction it has brought to Lebanon. So I don't know what we're going to get here, but once again, in any event, it's an opportunity for Lebanon to finally exert sovereignty over its own territory. And we're hearing this even from people like Walid Jumblat, who are, not happy about Iran and its proxies' continued domination over the country. What was the second part of the question?
About the army. I was asking about the army, and you said army Hezbollah ثلاثية الشعب والجيش والمقاومة. So now it's gonna be ثنائية الجيش والشعب بدون المقاومة. What do you think?
This is up to the people of Lebanon, but certainly if I wanted a successful country and not a country that was, launching wars not of its own choice against neighboring states, or having all prominent politicians and journalists, including those at النهار, murdered, I think it would be better for the country if Hezbollah was not what it is today. I was in the Pentagon in 2005, working on Lebanon. I started, funding the Lebanese armed forces. Before the Cedar Revolution, we were giving Lebanon $1.5 million a year for military education training programs. After the Cedar Revolution, we went to $70 million a year, and today, somewhere close to 300, a little bit more than $300 million a year. I think there is a lot of support for the bilateral mill-to-mill relationship and increasing the capacity and the ability of the LAF to step up and play a role in exerting the sovereignty of the state. And so once again, this is an opportunity, but I dare say there are a lot of critics of this funding in the United States, most prominently Senator Cruz, but plenty of others. And so I think if we don't see the LAF stepping up proactively doing the work of 1701, I think there's going to be increasing calls in the United States, questions about why we're funding this organization. We weren't funding this organization to fight Hezbollah, but there is a role to be played for the LAF.
Speaking of the funding for the Lebanese army, what about the U.S. conditions for supporting and funding the Lebanese army or leading a supervisory and monitoring committee for implementation? Now you're talking about that the Lebanese army should fight Hezbollah or something like that?
No, I didn't say this.
So
Yeah, no, they're expected to implement 1701, which is to ensure that there are no arms, militias, military infrastructure in the South other than that of the Lebanese armed forces. And so that means going out on patrols with UNIFIL, going into so-called private property, green without borders, Hezbollah military bases, and taking them apart, dismantling the infrastructure in South Lebanon, going and taking possession of forward positioned weapons, much of what Israel has been doing in the last 2 months in the South, and what UNIFIL and the Lebanese armed forces should have been doing since 2006, according to the commitment made by the government of Lebanon. Of course, they were banned from entering private property, Hezbollah military bases. You'll recall even the factory that was flooded from cement because there was a tunnel that went to Israeli territory. The UNIFIL couldn't even go and observe that because Hezbollah wouldn't let them. This is not talking about clashing directly with Hezbollah. It's about doing the work to ensure that Lebanon doesn't look like Syria permanently. That is, with Israel hitting Hezbollah targets all over Lebanon indefinitely. This is not going to persist. Israel's not going back to the status quo in southern Lebanon of October 7th.
And do you think that the army, the Lebanese army, can do this job without the financing that they need? General Joseph Aoun said the army needs at least $1 billion for this job. So,
well, listen, I'm not going to put a dollar figure on it. $1 billion seems like an awful lot for 5,000 to 10,000 troops being deployed to the South. But certainly, you're going to have to retrain soldiers. You're going to have to equip them. You're going to have to pay them salaries because of the man-made economic crisis in Lebanon. Lebanon cannot pay its military the 98% or 99% currency devaluation. People aren't showing up for work. So I think there will be some assistance required. But my sense is that the Trump administration will be very keen to make sure the work is being done and condition, support for Lebanese armed forces on actually carrying out the mandate, the mission that Lebanon had agreed to back in 2006.
Let me go back to the opportunity that you were talking about. In one of your articles, I think published on October 13, titled "The Day After in Lebanon," you wrote, and I quote here, "Absent a policy shift in Beirut, Lebanon will remain a satrapy of Iran, and the current window of opportunity to eradicate the Hezbollah threat will close." What do you mean by this? And do you think that as long as Hezbollah has influence, a solution cannot be reached, knowing that Hezbollah is a Lebanese component and cannot be excluded from political life in Lebanon?
Yeah, I'm not calling for the end of Hezbollah as a political party. We all know they're a political party and an Iranian-backed proxy militia army. I think Lebanon would be better off if there wasn't a political party whose main allegiance was Wilayat al-Faqih and to Tehran, and willing to drag Lebanon into consecutive wars on behalf of Iranian interests. But the United States position historically has not been that Hezbollah and Shiites cannot participate in Lebanese politics. Once again, there might be more Lebanese political parties among the Shiite if the Shiites in Lebanon weren't intimidated incessantly or killed in recent decades for standing up or disagreeing with the diktat of Hezbollah and Iran. But I am fairly sure that what the United States is interested in, and by the way, this isn't something that the United States is pressing one way or another, but there's not been a call in the United States for Shiites to be excluded from politics in Lebanon. This would be ridiculous. They are 38% of the population. This would not be good for the democratic prospects of Lebanon. But I dare say that there are a lot of Shiites in Lebanon who don't share the nihilistic political vision of Hezbollah and Iran, and actually, now again being forced from their homes because of Hezbollah's war of choice against Israel, might choose a different path if offered other type of opportunities. But no, this is about ending the fact that there is one militia in the country that dominates all the other sectarian groups by the force of arms. That when it doesn't agree on what the democratically elected government says, it invades Beirut and kills 100 people and shoots at the house of the prime minister. I think for most people, this is not preferable to have that type of situation.
Since we are talking about Iran, let me ask you, to what extent do you think the Middle East and the relations with Iran are priorities on the agenda of the new U.S. administration? During his first presidential term, President Trump withdrew from the nuclear deal and imposed sanctions on Iran. What policy is he likely to pursue today? And what does Elon Musk, I don't know if it is true or not, secret meeting with an Iranian officer indicate?
Well, listen, Trump withdrew from the JCPOA nuclear agreement and engaged in the maximum pressure campaign to try and compel Iran to enter into a deal that not only concerned the nuclear file, but also all of the destabilizing regional behavior, the support for militia in Yemen that have now closed Bab el-Mandeb and cut Egypt's Suez Canal revenues by 50%. The Hashid Shabi, which is basically Hezbollah, the new Hezbollah in Iraq, 100,000 men under arms who are not accountable to the government of Iraq, that receive money from the Iraqi government to the tune of $6.3 billion a year and have their own Sharakat Muhandis, like Jihad al-Bina, getting contracts, making money. And of course, Hezbollah, the the number one asset of Iran regionally. That all of these, and you can go further, you can say the Fatimiyun or other Iranian proxies in Syria, et cetera, that Trump wanted an agreement that would talk about Iran stopping its policy proactively of destabilizing Arab countries. So Trump had 2 years. It didn't succeed in bringing Iran to a knee, but I don't know what the policy is going to be this time, but I'm fairly certain that the president elect will try and get back into a deal with the Iranians. What the Biden administration had promised at the beginning, a deal that is longer and stronger, that also encompasses this destabilizing regional behavior. We'll see. I think Elon Musk's meeting with the Iranian ambassador to the UN is probably aimed at some sort of de-escalation and testing the ice to see whether something might be possible further down the road. But I would imagine a reintroduction of the maximum pressure campaign against Iran would be forthcoming, and probably or perhaps a more robust policy toward certain of these groups that are targeting Americans in countries in the region.
So you don't think will Lebanon pay the price for any potential nuclear deal between the Trump administration and Tehran, since Iran is playing the party card to improve its term in any future deal?
No, I don't think so. There was a lot of attention paid to Lebanon during the last Trump administration. I think the administration may be tougher on Lebanon, actually, the next administration, because of some of the critics, in Congress and the Senate, and people who may go into the administration. But of course, I think there will be a newfound appreciation for the importance of Lebanon, given his new relations with his daughter's father-in-law of Lebanese American origin.
Maybe my last question, I don't know, we'll see. During your tenure at the State Department, you always believed that sanctions were a good means of pressure, knowing that all the sanctions imposed by Washington on the Lebanese did not prevent Hezbollah from expanding and financing, as demonstrated by its military and financial arsenal and its relationship with Iran. Do you think that Trump will return to this policy, and is it still effective?
Well, let me say at the outset, policy is personnel. So I think it depends on who President Trump brings, what their particular philosophy is. I always thought that in the case of Lebanon, that sanctions were highly symbolic. Whether Gibran Bassil had bank accounts in America that we could freeze I think we understood that wasn't the case. It's a shame that the government of France didn't share the same view as the United States, because I think for many of these individuals who were designated, taking weekend trips to Paris was more important than whether or not they were designated by the United States. But I would imagine, on the one hand, that there will be additional sanctions from those people who were enablers or continue to be enablers of Hezbollah, people who undermine political reform, economic reform in Lebanon, and contribute to the continuing instability in Lebanon. But I do take some disagreement with whether they were effective. I think the sanctions on Iran for years before the period of time where the Biden administration came in and stopped implementing the enormous book of sanctions against the Tehran, I think they were enormously effective. If you look at the salaries that Hezbollah was able to pay its personnel in Lebanon, the social services, the budgets, all of these went down dramatically during the Trump administration. And then, after the Biden administration came in and all the sanctions were not implemented, and there were huge amounts of frozen assets released to the government in Tehran. I think that things changed quite a bit. Plus, we have to remember, Hezbollah has been building this arsenal, or rebuilding this arsenal, since 2006. And when they're, under financial pressure, they are innovative. They became, once again, narco traffickers, participating in the Captagon industry, working with the Bashar al-Assad regime to send these throughout the region, poisoning kids all over the Arab world to make a buck. So that and the continued, prevention or obstruction of any type of financial reforms in Lebanon, because Hezbollah is profiting so much off the broken cash economy in Lebanon. I think there are all sorts of things that can be done by the new administration, but there are also all kinds of things that can be done right now by people in Lebanon to take steps to move forward. Pressing their authoritarian speaker of parliament to convene sessions, to put together
president.
For the election. I'm not sure. I'm personally not sure that a president, depending on who it is, will make any difference to Lebanon. But to make decisions on hard issues, banking reform, other things, and to actually secure your border with Syria, to actually consolidate the favor that Israel did for Lebanon by downsizing this enormous militia. I think the suffering is terrible. I think the fact that there's 1 million people that had to leave their homes is terrible, but I also think it's terrible that there's an Iranian-backed militia in your country that determines matters of war and peace without regard for any type of consensus or government. So there's a cost that was paid for that, and I hope we can, with a positive government, move past that and start making good decisions for your country.
My last question, are you optimistic from where you are standing, and when you look at the Lebanese situation now with the new, I don't know if we can say, with the new administration, American administration, are you optimistic?
You have an opportunity. I wouldn't say I'm optimistic. I think, if the past is precedent, Lebanon misses a lot of opportunities. People don't stand up. I'm reminded after the Cedar Revolution about how many of the political elite who helped drive the Cedar Revolution, get Syria out of your country, and that particular occupation, how these very same people entered into an electoral agreement with Hezbollah. And so I hope that this opportunity isn't squandered.
Still on. Anyway, David Sheinker, thank you for your time.
Thank you.